Okay, thank you very much. Welcome to the Licensing Committee on Tuesday, the 17th of September, 2024. We will follow the agenda, beginning with item number 1. To receive apologies for absence, I have 2. I have Councillor Knight and Councillor Marsh. Apologies for absence. Item number 2, to receive declarations of interest from members in respect of any matter on the agenda. Have I any declarations? None, thank you very much. Number 3, to be agreed by general affirmation, the minutes of the previous meeting held on 29 July 2024. Is that agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Item number 4, to consider any items that the chairman agrees to take as urgent business. I have none. Item number 5, request for an increase in Hackney carriage fares 2024, which is why we're having this meeting. If I could please invite John to go through the papers and explain for us. Thank you.
Chair, thank you. Members, the report before yourselves this evening is to consider an application and petition from a section of the Hackney trade requesting an increase to the Hackney carriage fares. The petition and the application is set out in Appendix 1. Now, the Hackney fares are fixed by the Council, and the last increase in fares was in September 2022. A request has been received from a section of the trade to increase the current tariff. The recommendations are set out in the report for the members. And as background, the fares that are charged by Hackney carriages are set and regulated by the Council. There's a set tariff for journeys, and drivers are not permitted to charge more than the metered fare. However, they can charge less if they wish to do so. I would point out that the Council does not have any ability to regulate the fares for private hire vehicles. Mr Andrew Harding has submitted a request and petition on behalf of the Hackney trade to increase the Hackney fares. The supporting information supplied with the documentation makes a request on the grounds that the last increase was 2 years ago in 2022, and there hasn't been a fare review since that date. Additionally, he states that the general cost of living has significantly increased, together with specific vehicle costs. Licensing costs have also increased by 10% each year. Prior to the meeting, Mr Harding also sent through some comments which he asked me to put before members in relation to the application. He states that, as you're aware, the last increase that they had was in September 2 years ago. And although this increase on paper looks high at 15.9%, it does reflect a 2-year period, which equates to 7.9% each year. He points out that most of the general public will have had annual salary reviews with their employers, and it's also essential that the taxi trade has a fair and sustainable income going forward with its high cost base. He points out that the increase that they're asking the Council to approve is a straight increase only on the start-up fare, which is the flag fall. That's increasing, the proposal is by 60 pence on Tariff 1 from £3.80 to £4.40, and pro rata on Tariff 2 and Tariff 3. He asked members to bear in mind that the yardage and the pence per yardage is not being asked to change. So on longer journeys, the actual increase is quite minor, and members will see from the attached appendix where it set out the actual increase between flagfall and up to 5 miles, and you'll see that the actual increase falls off quite substantially after 2, 3, 4 miles. The comments are that, for example, the fare from the station to the Broadway after waiting an hour or so at the station would obviously increase 60p, which he does not consider to be either unfair or excessive. Quite often drivers do have to wait a long time in between jobs, and if your one job in the hour is just from the railway station up to the end of the Broadway, obviously that means what you're getting per hour is obviously quite low. Obviously it's the luck of the draw as to what passenger you do get, but that's one of the facts that they face currently. He also points out that the installation of CCTV cameras has costed drivers in the region of £600 to £700 per taxi. The licensing costs from the council have increased, as stated, approximately 10% last year and 10% this year. Insurance for taxis has gone up anything from 15 to 80%. And Mr Harding actually comments that his has gone up by over double after shopping around for the best he could get. So it's quite a substantial increase. MOT and fitness tests have increased over the last 2 years, together with servicing costs. And he does comment that the 10-year life policy on taxis obviously becomes a huge outlay to replace a vehicle and potentially could force drivers out of the trade if they're unable to get appropriate recompense for their work. He points out that tyre replacements have gone up by over 10%, and although petrol and diesel costs have not returned, although down, they haven't returned to the pre-COVID levels and are still quite variable at times. He points out the cost of living, although inflation is down over the last couple of months, it was slightly up last month. Mortgage rates and rent still remain at high levels and are very slow at coming down. And he also comments that food prices remain high along with energy costs set to rise again in October. And he does comment that the outlook for October's budget, as they're being warned, it could get worse before it gets better. He does ask for your members' appreciation in considering the increase, and obviously he's hopeful it be agreed upon. As stated, the proposed increase is for just the initial flagfall to be increased by 60p, so that's from £3.80 to £4.40, with the pro rata increase across tariffs 2 and 3. And as I pointed out, as no increase or change is requested to the yardage or other fares, the actual percentage impact of the increase decreases over longer distances. Following the submission by Mr Harding, the licensing department wrote to all Hackney carriage vehicle proprietors to consult and canvass their views regarding the proposed fare increase. A total of 132 vehicle licence holders were contacted. This is because, although we have 154 Hackney vehicle licences issued, some have more than one vehicle licence, so proprietors only had one vote rather than have the number of votes for the number of vehicles they had. A total of 50 vehicle owners responded, and of these responses, 78% were in favour of the fare increase and 22% against the increase. There were additional comments which were submitted by drivers, both for and against the proposal. These have been collated and are on Appendix 4. It should just be noted that when the licensing team consulted the vehicle owners, 3 of the interested parties on the petition actually voted against the proposed increase. However, it should be borne in mind that there is a majority of drivers who are in favour of the increase when we surveyed them. The next steps are, should the committee agree the increase, then the council is required to publish a notice of the increase within a local paper for 2 weeks. If there are any objections received, then the matter will come back for consideration of this committee in November. If there are no representations, then it is anticipated that the increase would take effect from the 1st of November this year. The reason it's the 1st of November is because there is time needed to arrange the meter companies to be able to change all the meters at the same time, and obviously arrange for drivers to be on a set day at a set place. The Town Police Clauses Act and the Local Government Miscellaneous Provisions Act give the power and mechanism for the local authority to set fares, and that's set out within the report. There are financial implications to the advertising of the fare change. However, this is met within the existing Hackney carriage budget. I will note the equality and customer services implications. Taxis are obviously a useful means for transport for those communities where transport services are either infrequent, difficult to get to, or public transport isn't an option. Fares are set to ensure there's a balance between the drivers earning a reasonable income to what would be a reasonable cost to the public to use the service. As pointed out, the fare is the maximum that a driver can charge, and he can certainly discount the fare if he wishes. And the charge is for the carriage of the person, and there's no difference for the price of using a vehicle to one used for transporting wheelchair users or passengers who have assistance dogs. And it's obviously important, as Mr. Harding has set out, that drivers are able to earn an adequate income for their service. If they're unable to earn an adequate income, then we run the risk of drivers leaving the trade and there being insufficient vehicles for the public. That's the report before members this evening, and obviously I'm willing to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Bryan. So it is now open for discussion. Any members? Councillor Kenny?
Yeah, I have a quick question. John, how much was the increase, the last increase that was given? I didn't spot that anywhere in the report. So when they, how much was it?
The last increase that came before this committee 2 years ago, it was an increase of 80 pence. And there was a change to the yardage as well. Initially, drivers asked for a 60p increase, but this committee, on considering the increase, decided that drivers actually should get an 80p increase.
Thank you. Any other questions for councillors? Yes, Councillor Kennedy.
Thank you. John, you mentioned at the very beginning that there were recommendations in the report?
Yes, certainly, Councillor. It's set out at item 3. There's considerations and recommendations for the committee. Obviously, if yourselves agree to recommendation A, then there's no need to go on to B and C.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor de Bell.
Thank you very much indeed. John, as always, brilliant. I was just thinking, do you think that this could head off things at the pass so that we could get to a situation where they won't be needed to be increased again for another couple of years? But I mean, with what's going on at the moment, financially, you can't really sort of say, I suppose.
No, Councillor, you can't really say. Councillors probably remember last year, it was decided that rather than consider a yearly increase, that it would be left to drivers because they are best placed to know, one, their customers, they know their exact costs, an increase in their costs.
Absolutely.
And they, in essence, know how much their customers could deal with in respect of any increases. And the other problem that we had was actually trying to work out a formula for increasing on a regular basis. It may well be that drivers don't need feel they don't require another increase for the next 2 years. It may be obviously sooner than that, depending on how the economy behaves.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Councillor Cherry.
Yes, just a small point. You're saying here that replacement tyres have gone up 10 to 15%. How is that figure? How did you come to that figure? I'm saying this because I myself have replaced 3 of my tyres this year due to the current state of roads and potholes. And obviously, taxi drivers being on the road all the time. I wonder how you've come to this figure of 10 to 15%.
Certainly, Councillor. That figure's been provided by Mr. Harding, and it's the extra expense that he's experienced. I would guess if you go for cheaper tyres, you will find that obviously they're cheaper. However, with tyres, you actually get what you pay for. And bearing in mind that licensed vehicles do travel, do have a high mileage, I would think, if any driver worth his salt would actually go for a higher quality tyre, because it is a false economy to buy a cheap one.
Thank you. Committee, any other comments? Councillor Kenny.
Yeah, it's another question for you, John. I know that the 2 mile fare is a kind of a benchmark, and it's the one that's used in the national statistics. Do we know what the typical or the most frequent journey is in our area, because I guess every geography is different, but I find it almost impossible to work out what the effect on a taxi driver's income would be. And the example you gave of a fare from, the station to the Broadway is probably a more common commuter's fare would be substantially longer than that. So, I mean, have you got any feeling for what's typical in this area?
I haven't got any definitive information. My feeling would be that the majority of the journeys are probably over 3 miles. They obviously get shorter journeys, they obviously get longer journeys. But that's why the potential impact of the increase lessens with distance. So I would say the average journey that drivers actually do would probably not be affected greatly by this increase. It's just the very short journeys on the flag fall which would be affected most.
Councillor?
So this is not a question, but it's a comment. It seems to me that people I've met on the doorstep, a lot of older people in the community, we know that the bus services are not that frequent within that. So a really common thing is for someone to want to get from the edges of Hayward Heath to the shops. So, I've met on the doorstep pensioners who worry about the cost of getting a taxi into town. Now, that is exactly the front-loaded area where the costs are going up the most. So that's something that gives me pause for hesitation. To hesitate, I understand it's probably quite a complex piece of calculation to work out how you do yardage against standing costs, but I would just make that comment to everyone that it's the people who in our community who need to use taxis for those in-town journeys who will be most disaffected, and maybe your commuter who can afford to live out in Balcombe or somewhere further afield, who would have a better ability to pay. Anyway, that's just an observation.
So I noticed in the comments made by a particular driver who was against this, and most of all because of vulnerable people. But I do note that it is up to the driver, they can discount. So if there were a particular vulnerable individual that they knew or felt and a shorter distance, they could actually discount. They don't have to charge the full tariff. Any other comments on this? Yes. Councillor de Bell?
I'm happy to propose a no.
Oh, okay. Well, we're looking at the recommendations, all right? We have 3. So the first recommendation, A, is to agree to the proposal submitted by a section of the trade and amend the tariff by the requested amounts from November 1st, 2024. So that is what we will vote on now. If you please vote electronically, please. It will come up in a minute. Are there 13 members? There are 13 members. Is that sufficient? Everybody's voted? So this motion, this recommendation is carried by 10 votes, 1 against and 2 abstention. Thank you very much for that. So we'll proceed the next steps on this proposal. So the last item on the agenda will be questions pursuant to the Council Procedure Rule 10.2, due notice of which has been given. I have none. So that terminates our committee meeting at 7:20. Thank you very much.
Hello, Mr. Elected.
Stream is now ended.
To stop, okay.